My name is Luca Crivelli. I am a public health economist, and I am currently the Deputy Director of the Swiss School of Public Health. In spite of the gray sky and the mild temperature of today here in Lugano, I wish you all a very warm welcome to this fifth session of our summer school. You see here the program with the different topics. We have today a very relevant and important topic, that of inequalities. Before we move to the main part of the session, I would like to devote 2-3 minutes to the celebration of our 30th birthday at summer school, as we did in all plenaries so far. We have recorded the voice of Jonah, a senior country manager at the Vaccine Alliance in Geneva, Switzerland, who attended the summer school in presence in 2019. Suzanne Sachs lent her voice to Jonah because she wrote, in fact, a text, and Suzanne spoke this text so that we can listen to the testimony of Jonah. I hope I can manage technically.
While any activity before 2020 seems like a lifetime ago, as COVID has distorted my concept of time, I do fondly remember my participation in the SS.
I think it's not
While
working.
any activity before 2020
Do you
seems
listen?
like a lifetime ago, as COVID has distorted my concept of time, I do fondly remember my participation in the SSPH Plus Summer School in Public Health Policy, Economics, and Management as if it were yesterday. In the summer of 2019, I took the Multisectoral Approaches course and the Behavior Change Communication course, both covering 3 days. In a short time span, the professors covered critical information and insights related to their fields of expertise, leaving us students with a solid foundation of understanding and curiosity for further exploration and learning. The course is carefully balanced, discussing critical theoretical information with exchanging views and experiences between students. The latter I enjoyed most, as I was surrounded by participants from across the globe in diverse work fields, some early in their careers, others further advanced. This led to inspiring discussions, sharing of different perspectives, challenging each other to think outside the box and trigger new insights. I was impressed with how much I had learned in just a week and left inspired and motivated to study further in behavior change communication and social marketing at the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute. I became very curious how one could use the expertise of a corporate marketing department to get people to drink Coca-Cola or smoke cigarettes, and use these same insights to encourage people to make healthier life choices on a much smaller budget. The course showed us some great examples of successes and even funnier examples of failure. But the summer school doesn't only teach in the classroom. The organizers took us outside and ensured we truly enjoyed the beautiful Lugano through social activities and evening events. Lugano may be one of the most beautiful places in Switzerland, and the lake view is not unlike the happy ending scene in the James Bond movie. The social activities enabled me to spend more time with my diverse fellow students that I would not have easily met during my normal day job or life. I truly enjoyed the social aspect built into the summer school, and with some students I managed to stay in contact. If you're still in doubt on whether to join, where else would you learn a lot in a short time span, leave inspired, enrich your summer school network, and awaken your favorite inner James Bond character? I'd say it's an easy choice.
Okay, I would like to ask all the participants to this plenary to write in the chat their country of origin and their background, in order to give our speaker also a little bit the flavor of the diversity that we have in this group, and also be focused also on your professional backgrounds in the presentation. The topic of today is a chronic disease that affects the entire world, but is not long COVID. We live in a world of inequalities. Inequality is a multidimensional issue. First of all, we have, of course, inequality of income. And in this graph, you see that several countries, in particular in the South, succeeded in reducing inequalities between 1990 and 2015. These are the countries below the diagonal. But most of the people live in countries like China, India, that have experienced an increase in inequality of income in the last 25 years. We have inequality, of course, at the level of the fortune, knowing that the top 1% of the population in the world own a very big share, which is by far much more than what is owned by the bottom 75% of the population. We have probably better results with respect to inequality in health. You see here inequality in life expectancy within some countries like Russia, United States, Germany, declining over time. But we have new forms of inequalities, or not new because they are really new, but because we perceive much more the relevance of these inequalities. One is, of course, the ecological footprint. We have countries that are exploiting the earth much more than other countries. And then we have, of course, also inequality in terms of gender. This graph show the ratio of schooling, years of schooling between male and female in some countries. And we are closing the gap, but not everywhere. So there is still something to do. And finally, a very new form of inequality is the digital divide. So the introduction of internet, of mobile phone, might increase inequality, but also, as I show here in the article, might become an instrument to empower women and to reduce gender inequalities, in particular in the global South. As most of you, I grew up in the era of non-communicable diseases. Therefore, the coronavirus is the first epidemic that I ever experienced in my life. What about the relationship between the pandemic and inequality? One aspect of the global experience struck me. In my public health training, I learned to unveil the social determinants of health, to acknowledge the existence of a social gradient in most diseases. But this was apparently not the case for COVID-19, apparently. We have seen the contagion touching politicians, Premier League football players, actors, members of royal families, residents, rich and affluent people belonging to the top 1% of the income distribution. But all these people benefited from better access to healthcare, and we were able to observe that inequity in the mortality rates across social classes did not disappear. My hope is that the common destiny we were experiencing through coronavirus and the interdependence of each other would finally awaken humanity from the ideology of meritocracy. Most of the success in our life is the consequence of luck and favorable starting conditions, not just the result of our merits. My great hope was that the globe experience we were living thanks to coronavirus, the experience of a common bad, could lead our societies to a new understanding of the common good. But in the past months, we did observe both the highest solidarity and the worst self-interested behaviors. And inequality seems continuing growing. So to address this very relevant topic, I am very pleased to introduce our guest speaker of today, Dr. Nathalie Jean-Baptiste, Senior Program Manager, Wealth Inequality at the Julius Baer Foundation. After graduation from the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City, she obtained a master's degree in urban studies in Germany and a doctorate in urban planning and waste management. Prior to joining the Julius Baer Foundation, she led an action research unit in East Africa for about 4 years, was a Marie Curie Global Fellow, and worked for 15 years in research and project implementation in the field of urban studies. Her work focuses explicitly on inequalities, urban vulnerabilities, and the transformation in the global south. So, Dr. Jean-Baptiste, the floor is yours. We are very pleased to listen to your talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the organizer for inviting me. And thank you for all for joining in. I would like, if you could please share the screen with my presentation, and then we will start from there. Thank you. So if you can go to the next slide, please. I am having a little bit of difficulties with the technologies because I'm connecting from Rwanda from my phone. So I do not see the slide. So I'd like to, let me just find out how I can, yes, now I'm good. So first I'd like to invite you to take a look at the image on your left. And tell me what you see. Do you see a divide? Do you see one or two settlements? Do you see inequality? Take a closer look and imagine how it must be to be ill, to be sick on the left or on the right side of this picture. And perhaps in the chat later, you could tell us, or you could share with us, where would you want to be? So no matter if you are a student of public health, if you are a practitioner, if you are a doctor, or whether you work for the government, these questions are relevant because they help us contextualize wealth inequality and health, and understand that in some places in the global south, the state of public health can be divided by a wall, by a creek, and by a field. Can you go on the next slide, please? I'm Nathalie Jean-Baptiste. My background is in urban studies, you just heard it, and development. I will take the next 20 minutes to discuss the deeper existing condition of the wealth gap from the perspective of the South. I'm joining you from Kigali, Rwanda, and this talk is actually based on 3 considerations. The first, you heard it already in the introduction, my own contextual experiences. I lived and worked mostly in the global South. I did both research and implemented projects. The second, you heard a little bit more also about that at the beginning, the literature. In the past years, there have been quite a bit of documents written about wealth inequality. And the third is the experience that I currently have managing 13 wealth inequality projects worldwide at the Julius Baer Foundation, where I serve as a senior program manager. Could you go to the next slide, please? Now, as already Mr. Chair, Professor Crivelli just mentioned, there are a number of public statements and publications that came out in 2020 and 2021 that put quite a bit of emphasis on the wealth divide and how COVID had amplified what we already know, but now that became even more obvious or even blatant. This is the stark differences between our societies today. In his statement in 2020, the Secretary General of the UN revealed deep fractures in our society. He spoke of a two-speed world. He spoke of the misbelief of a post-racist world. He spoke of the myth that we are on the same boat. And he also questioned the free market capacity to deliver healthcare for all. Now, when the pandemic hit, we've seen different responses from different governments. And in particular, in the South, these responses were determined by 3 factors. 1, data, the existence, availability, and capacity to generate data at a different speed. The second, it was the political ideology, the type of ruling groups or regimes, whether they are left, right, or center, and their commitment to the society that they serve, and in some cases that they rule. And the last type of response we saw was depended on the agility, the speed at which and the pace at which responses and measures were put in place. Now, thanks to initiatives such as the Inequality.org, which is sponsored and featured by the Institute of Policy Studies, we know now that the millionaires and billionaires of this world have actually increased their wealth. And we've seen the inequalities in the distributions of vaccine, for instance. Agence France-Presse declared that 56% of the dose have been administered in the high-income country, and 0.1, I've seen other numbers, 0.2% have been administered in the 29 lowest income countries. This will change with the COVAX initiative, but the gap will not be reduced so much. And that causes us to pause and think. Perhaps in more recent times, the work of Oxfam allows everyone to get a sense of the multidimensional effect of the COVID pandemic and how it exposed, but not only exposed, build upon the existing inequalities of wealth, inequalities of gender, and inequalities of race. Next slide, please. Now, for years, scientists have shown the correlation between economy and life expectancy. So we knew that poorer societies live shorter lives. But the data has also shown that the level of inequality influences life expectancy. Greater inequality appears to lead to worse health outcome. That does not necessarily apply for the global South, though. The example is the US. The millions of human losses we've seen in the US is a clear example that affluent society can be affected negatively. And we heard it also in the introduction of this talk. I guess the work of Wilkinson over the last decade is quite telling, because the symptoms of inequality trouble all levels of society. Across the board, mental health, level of violence and addiction, even life expectancy, are affected by psychosocial caused by, and wait for it, these psychosocial stress are caused by 1, income gaps, and 2, status anxiety. What this means is that health and well-being are not only biological and medical construct, they are also structural. And they can be determined by distance, by the level of infrastructure, the quality of the infrastructure, how isolated you are, by your contextual environment. Next, please. I'm waiting for the next slide so I can continue this one. Thank you. It might take a couple of seconds, yes. The pandemic has also exacerbated long-standing gender inequalities. Women are more likely than men to work in service occupation, including domestic work, restaurant service. And these occupations, they are not easy to do by distance or teleworking. It's not an option for many women. So frontline jobs, which are the ones that often deem essential, are often done by women, and they're heavily staffed by women. Now, 12 billion hours of unpaid care work is performed by women and girls on a daily basis. And this work, this care work, is often considered as not work. Yet, it contributes to about 10.8 trillion of the global economy, according to a report from Credit Suisse. So it is a bit harsh to say, but I'll say it anyway. In many parts of the world, it seems that inequalities amplified by COVID does has a color, it has a gender, and the circumstances at birth determine the chance to bounce back from the global trauma that we're living now, which is COVID. The next slide, please. Now, let me share with you our definition of wealth inequality. What it means to us at the foundation is the unequal distribution of assets across different groups of people, different organizations, and countries. And when we talk about asset, it's not limited to economic capital. This is what economists and researchers call income wealth. We're talking here about all types of assets, the type of assets that individual and group accumulate over time, and that includes bond, pension funds, but that includes also material goods, land, education, and even network. So when we at the foundation, we talk about reducing wealth inequality, it is not only about the money. We're also talking about intangible assets that allows an individual and a group to have power. That includes information, that includes education, that includes opportunities, and wait for it, that includes also health. Next, please. So we know that wealth inequality was already on the rise before the pandemic. We did some additional research at the foundation, and we've published our last annual report of 2020. We've published some number that we found, and it's available online. You can feel free to consult it. When you do, you will see some numbers here are shown on the left side of the screen. It's a snapshot of our annual report. And you will learn that the world is far from reaching the goal that we all had, the Sustainable Development Goal number 10 of reducing inequalities by 2030. In fact, if business continues as usual, the top 1% will owe about 39% of the global wealth by 2050. The problem now, it's not about the wealthy or the successful individual earning money. This has happened, since the 1970s. The problem is the pace at which wealth is being accumulated in the hands of very few people. And one reason is that wealth inequality encompasses far more than income. And these inequalities are in some way much more fundamental. Next, please. Now, once we understand that wealth inequality implies recognizing how wealth accumulates for the few, then we can address certain dimension of it. For instance, there are researchers that are looking at wealth accumulation, others that are looking at broad national patterns of inequality. There are people that are looking or questioning how income and wealth is distributed on the basis of gender, race, age, and community. And some people look at redistribution. Can we go to the next slide, please? But we at the foundation, we look at two aspects. First, we look at the social capital, and it's about the significance of network. We look at for us, it is a major dimension of wealth inequality in society, and we can do something about it. And this social capital, it allows people to gain access to network and to grow. We look also at social mobility, which is the movement of individual and household between social strata and the likelihood of moving up or downward. And we look at what are the elements that can allow a better and quicker social mobility for some societies. Next, please. But we cannot do this alone. This is actually a huge job, a huge endeavor. And what I'd like to do now is to share with you 3 ways in which we collaborate. Could you go to the next slide, please? Now, in this map, I'm showing you where we invest in reducing wealth inequality. We currently partner with 13 organizations. They vary across sector, they vary across industries and size, and they have one thing in common. That's the drive and the boldness to create a space of engagement where they bring the top 10% and the bottom 40 together and jointly finding a solution to address the wealth gap in their specific context. But let me be more specific. The next slide, please. Since I am in Rwanda at the moment, and precisely yesterday, I had an insightful exchange with the team of Women for Women, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this project, which has taken an enormous challenge to strengthen the skills and the networks of entrepreneurial rural women in the 7 regions of Rwanda. To reduce wealth inequality, the Women for Women in Rwanda office will, over the next 3 years, connect women micro-entrepreneur at the bottom and socio-economic at the bottom of the socioeconomic pyramid. And so these are women selling vegetables, women doing handcrafts, jobs, and they will connect them with potential business partners at the top. And in collaboration with Women for Women, our goal at the foundation is to boost women's social education capital to help them become effective communicators and negotiators to have access to new markets. And I don't know if the director is in the call or somebody from Women or Women is attending, but maybe in the Q&A, they can say more about the program, particularly addressing the health impact and the health issues within their program. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, I recall Nino's Künstli presentation on Monday, where he mentioned that effective communication is as important as the science itself. We know that the scientists in the last months have had hard time convincing the general public. And we at the foundation know that we need to find ways to speak about wealth inequality in a language that everybody understands. And this is why we set up the Wealth Inequality Initiative. And this is a platform that sheds light on the global challenge of wealth inequality. It's an online platform. Anybody can have access to it. And what we want to do is 4 things. We want to awaken interest about wealth inequality. We want to circulate knowledge about wealth inequality. We want to also mobilize different stakeholders because we know together we are stronger. And we want to drive action towards more equitable societies. Can you take us to the next slide, please? What we learn is that we cannot only speak to the brains and the mind, we need to speak to the hearts. And to do that, we use a number of different tools. The video showing things that work, for instance, the podcast series to pick the brains of the scientists, of the expert on wealth inequality. We also make statements that people can think. And we also work with science to bring the knowledge on wealth inequality further through papers. I will say it sounds a little bit impossible these days, but we do want to help shape a more just and sustainable society. Can you take us to the next slide, please? And I'm about to finish. Now, the Julius Baer Foundation, another way in which we are collaborating is together with the Swiss School of Public Health. We recently called for expression of interest to develop projects on wealth inequality that has a focus on health provision. Why we do this? It's because we know that we need to work together. The project is expected to be implemented in regions that are more affected by wealth inequality. And we know that the driving forces of wealth inequality comes from the lens of public health are multiple. And we want to work together with other experts, people thinking differently than us. So we look very much forward to that collaboration with the Swiss School of Public Health. The next slide, and I think it's my last slide. I actually want to thank you all because I also recall Suzanne Suggs' comment on the collective force that is required even more today to overcome what we're living now. And I hope, though very short, this talk was useful, and I invite you to attend other lectures and speak about it, and develop your own sense of what is right and what is correct. And I look forward to hearing your questions next. Thank you again very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jean-Baptiste. It was a great speech with a lot of insights in the topic. I really appreciated also this broad understanding of wealth inequalities, which goes beyond only, let's say, the capital and the fortune dimension. I would like to give some technical hints to the audience. You have two possibilities to intervene. First of all, you can raise your hand, and the technical office of the summer school will give you the possibility to intervene directly, so to ask the question or to comment on the talk. Just keep in mind that if you switch on your video, since everything is live streamed on YouTube, you accept to have your face recorded in this video. But this is a possibility, and is for sure much better to be directly on video. The second possibility is to write your questions in the Q&A box. So in order to give you the time also to reflect and to ask your question, I pick up immediately the question by Sharon Stella. She wrote the following question to you. There are still huge income gaps, and this manifests in health. Out of curiosity, do you think we will achieve the SDG targets, particularly goals number 3, 5, and 10? What do you think we should do to help the world reach these targets?
Thank you. I've already hinted that I'm very skeptical about reaching the goal number 10. And the reason why, the numbers about the way the few accumulate wealth and the way more money has been made by a few during the COVID pandemic makes me doubtful of the possibility of reaching these goals. And we have a good somehow excuse with this COVID, but even without COVID, I think it would have been also difficult. But have you seen or have you heard that when in my talk, there are so many multidimensional burdens that I think it's going to be difficult. Now, the next question is, what do I think we should do to reach these goals? I think working in silos is already something that we can change, meaning that a person like me who has very little, public health expertise, but more development expertise, needs to be in conversation like the ones we're having now, to have another perspective and understand the problem and find solution that perhaps doesn't come from my own field. I think we need to start thinking a little bit outside the box.
Thank you. In the meantime, a second question has been posted into the Q&A chat. Is anonymous, but I think just because the name is not displayed in the Zoom. How can we grow institutions that push health agendas in Africa too? I know we have different players doing that already, but the youth or young people are really not aware of them, or rather meaningfully engaged. When we talk about health and healthcare, how best can we engage the youth meaningfully? I am worried that we are creating a gap where we will have a generation of non-experts in health.
I'm worried too. And recently I took part of a conversation about, how do we change first the education, and how do we make education more meaningful for the youth? There's millions of young graduates coming out in the African continent. I know Tanzania better, and I can give that example more concretely because I was working there. They are coming out with a diploma, but they're not very skilled and apt to really tackle the multi-dimensional problems in the practice. And I think, changing the model in which we share knowledge and we acquire knowledge is very important. Then after that, making sure that they don't only have a diploma, but they can apply it somewhere. So making enterprises and the private sector responsible for hiring and training them in a way that they can perform as young members of society. So this is what's coming out on my head right now.
Thank you. In the meantime, I got a message that Sharon Stella was also the author of the second question. So thank you also for putting your face behind this question. I have a third one from Arlinda Sheu. You presented that COVAX would help in the figures 56% in the Western part versus 0.1% of the doses of vaccines, but it would not do much. What do you think would change that figure effectively? What do we need to change access to vaccine in a more equitable way?
I'm hearing a lot of other propositions, and I'm hearing a lot of, but more than proposition, I'm hearing a lot of criticism about the way it is right now. The vaccination rollout is right now happening, and I think that in parts of the world where the government regimes are weak or weaker, there needs to be another actor that comes and supports the development or the distributions. And these actors are sometimes social enterprises. There are groups that can do their work to change or to solve an issue in society. And sometimes these actors, they operate in shadow, and they're not very stimulated, and they cannot work a lot. Because a government that is already troubled, already under a lot of stress, cannot solve everything. He needs other actors to come into play. And in cases where governments are fractures or fragile, these other actors can operate, and giving them more leeway, more capacity to be in the discussion, for instance, in the COVAX initiative. I don't know how many social enterprises were really on the discussion table for the distribution of that vaccine. So I think other actors needs to come into play.
Thank you. In the chat, I found a question by Rashan Baki. Thinking of SDGs, pushing towards achieving these goals might cause further inequality itself in this disconnected world in terms of strategies. What do you think?
So I gather that you're not a fan of the SDGs by what you say. I'm, as I said at the beginning, I'm skeptical, but I think we also need a roadmap. Because if we don't have one, if we don't have a goal, we don't know where to, to what extent and where to go and what is it that we want to achieve. My question is not having those goals. My question is, what are the mechanisms and that are in place, and whether these mechanisms are democratized. That means more people can do something about that. And I think my plea here is to think about that we have a an array of actors that are capable, but allowing them a platform to show their capability, it's not, we haven't been able to do that yet. And in the global south and in countries in like Tanzania and others, I think we need to think about this a little bit more.
So given the fact that in the meantime, we don't have new questions, I allow myself to ask one. So, Suzanne, sorry, you raised the hand, please.
Yeah, thank you, Luca. Oddly enough, I can't type in anything into the Q&A. I can just see it as I'm a co-host in this session. Nathalie, thank you so much for this talk and sharing your thoughts, both your optimism, but also your skepticism. As you heard me speak on Monday morning, you know, I also have a lot of skepticism and frustration with the way things are going. And for those of you who attended the plenary session last evening, local time in Switzerland at 5 o'clock with Angus Thompson from UNICEF talking about inoculating against misinformation, he shared also his deep frustration with building things, but not actually trying to create value and selling them, specifically vaccination and the COVAX system. We store vaccines and we have low uptake. So we have multiple problems. But what my question for you is, we have, you know, public health traditionally has tried to stay very pure, right? No influence from industry, no biases, et cetera. And over the years, many people in public health have realized that, you know, everybody has a bias, including public health departments, including organizations that are thought to be very, very pure. Everybody has their motivation, they have their vision of what things should be like, and they operate under those lenses. And as such, we've started to really understand that to tackle some of these big, wicked problems like wealth inequality, we have to embrace private-public partnerships. And you are working at a bank, at the foundation of the banks. And so I think you know this really well. So I wanted your perspective, maybe just to help those who are more thinking that we have to stay very clean. How can we work together to really accomplish these wicked or address these wicked problems, make progress, but at the same time, not perpetuating the wealthy, just making more wealth? And I don't want you to speak about, you know, your organization. I'd like to understand that more in general from your perspective. Thank you.
Yes. And to answer your question, let me tell you a little bit about also my shock. I've had a background in working in academia and in working in research, and then I changed into the private sector. And what I've learned is that there is a pace in which people in the private sector operate that is very different from the pace at which we operate in other sectors. And that pace allows faster reaction, faster response. And when you have a problem like COVID that you need to respond quickly, then you better be able to be agile enough to do it. And responding to your question specifically, the cleanness, you can remain clean, but if you cannot solve a problem, then what is the point of that cleanness? And that's when you need to talk to or work with those who are able to really take matters into their hands and respond to a certain problem. Because there are approaches on fast responding. And I think in that sense, connecting with other sectors, and it's not only the private sectors. The private sector also needs to have its own, check up. But I think the multidiscipline, the multiple visions that we have when we have different from organization from different industries and sectors working together. We spoke on Monday of the we. No, it can only help us move forward. So, yeah. So clean is fine, but you need to work and you need to respond, you know? And sometimes you need other actors to do that.
So in the meantime, we received 2 additional questions. One is from Jason from Canada, but now working in Ticino. Hello, thank you for the great presentation. How can countries address brain drain of their healthcare workers and professionals? Probably most of them are female, that will further drive global inequalities in healthcare. What role do wealthier countries have in this regard as well?
Yes, that's a big question, and that's not only a big question, but that's almost like a question that is important to me. And I've mentioned in the presentation at the beginning, at some point, about the inequalities related, manifested also the inequalities of gender, and the way the world has seen that inequalities amplified by COVID has a certain color, gender, etc., etc. I think the dichotomy of women in certain parts of the world that do certain jobs, certain domestic and service occupations, and the way they are not rewarded enough is something that needs to change in order for them to be able to feel fulfilled in the occupation that they have. And brain drain is something that can be addressed by offering a space where people feel fulfilled in their jobs and their activities. And that is not necessarily money. It's a combination of aspects in the environment that needs to be addressed. When care work is not considered as work in one part of the world and can be considered as work in another part, it's only human to go where this is considered as work. So what we need to change is not the movement. We need to change within what we need to change is the space and the opportunity and the environment for care work to be considered as work everywhere in the world.
If I just can add a second question to the same issue, because of course we experience healthcare workers movement from the south to the north, or from the east to the west, but we have also a more close movement, for instance, from Italy to Switzerland, or from Germany to Switzerland. And the problem is that to educate and train a healthcare professional, you need a lot of investment. So there is also another issue about this movement, the fact that some countries are investing tremendous resources in creating a workforce for healthcare services. And then other countries will profit from this investment as a positive externality, just offering higher salaries or better conditions to this population of workers. How you see this problem from your perspective?
I think also it's a question of infrastructure. If more women and more, sometimes in parts of the world, Black women or ethnic minorities, they work in neglected healthcare systems, this is also a problem. The problem is not the worker, the problem is the system within which they operate that needs to be changed. And that requires, again, a change in the way the policies that are put in place, the infrastructure that is put in place, the environment within work, the hours of working, a number of different factors. So it is also about responding and looking at how neglected the healthcare systems are in certain parts of the world, who operates in these neglected environments, and how to fix that.
Thank you. In the meantime, I got another question from Iliriana. The question is the following: do you think that the pandemic COVID-19 problem should create a new and very important brainstorm about wealth inequality?
It is already happening. I'm looking at the publications that have came out since end 2019 and 2021. And those publications are becoming even more aggressive. So we were talking about safety. This publication, the publication by the Oxfam, is tough. It requires us to stop and think. So I think the discussion is already there. But what we need to do is to have that discussion everywhere. So and really amplify the discussion and address the problems. It's not enough that the Secretary General says some harsh words to the world. It's more important that you say it in your context. It's more important that we all say it. It's more important that I, in my function now of Director of Wealth Inequality, to do something and to find and use the infrastructure and the resources I have to put a platform. And we don't know what's going to happen with it, but it's out there for everybody to see, everybody to use, and everybody to raise their voice.
If you allow, I would like to maybe launch a final question, because we are approaching the end of this hour. But I would like to go back to a sentence that impressed me very much when you say that one problem related to wealth inequality is the status anxiety, that people experience a frustration, just feeling less valuable than other people. And I think this relates to the work of Sir Michael Marmot, who really produced scientific evidence on this phenomenon of envy, and also relates to a book that I had the opportunity to read during the summer break by Robert Frank, an American economist, Luck and Success. So he's really focusing on the status externality that rich people are producing, for instance, to the middle class, and that push people to consume too much. Now, we know that happiness depends only weakly from consumption, but this negative externality is very important. So I would like to ask you, what do you think about a proposal that was made by Robert Frank to introduce a progressive consumption taxation, not an indirect one like VAT, but a direct one. So the people declare their income. They have to disclose what has been used for saving and what has been used for consumption. And then there is a progressive consumption tax in order to correct for this externality that conspicuous consumption is producing on the rest of society. What do you think about this proposal?
In my presentation, I mentioned also there's different ways of tackling the multi-dimension of wealth inequality. So there are people who are looking at, how wealth accumulates. Then some people look at tax, and this is one of the propositions. My view is that one needs to do what you can, where you are, and what is best you can do. In that sense, that there are places where taxation can be an answer, but there are places where it actually will not necessarily work. And I think in that sense, the multiple tackling wealth inequality from multiple angles, I think that's perhaps a more wise aspect. Taxation can work, and we've seen it in many countries in Europe. It functions. I would say that in Switzerland, people pay high amount of tax, and they see some of the responses that comes.
I think something happened with the connection. So we lost our speaker when she was saying probably the last words of her talk. I think it's very difficult, and the time is not there to try to get back the connection. What do you think, Suzanne? Should we probably close right now our plenary session?
I agree. I think her response was very clear, and so I think she was just at the end of her sentence primarily. So yes, Luca, I leave it to you to close.
So I just would like to express again my gratitude for organizing this series of plenary sessions. I saw in the chat a lot of feedbacks, people thinking for a very insightful, very inspiring presentation by our guest speakers. I think this is what we aim with this summer school, to push, to nudge people to think, to reflect, to change even their personal behaviors and their mind, and in particular to bring also their expertise and their experience. I think it's a great opportunity that you are offering to an increasing number of people. So thank you, Suzanne, for going on with this summer school, and I wish everybody the pleasure to continue. Maybe you want to close with I saw your finger, so if you.
I just wanted to remind everybody that that this evening, 5 o'clock local time here in Switzerland, we have another plenary session that I think I know is going to be fantastic, and I think very relevant to so many people here, talking about addressing health systems that are very fragile and overburdened. So I invite you to come at 5 o'clock local time again this evening. Thank you.
Bye bye, everyone.